Big package delivered. The town mocked and offered the obese girl to the mountain man. That's all I need, he replied. The autumn wind swept through the Missouri Territory with a bite that promised winter's early arrival. In the small settlement of Copper Ridge, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, the townspeople gathered at the general store as they did every week when the supply wagon arrived from St. Louis. Martha Sullivan stood at the back of the crowd, her substantial frame making her an easy target for whispers and sidelong glances. At 23 years old, she had grown accustomed to the cruelty that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Her father had died 2 years prior, leaving her alone with debts she could never repay and a community that saw her as nothing more than a burden. "Look at her," Mrs. Henderson muttered to her companion, loud enough for Martha to hear. "Eating us out of house and home, and what does she contribute? Can't even find herself a husband." Martha kept her eyes fixed on the dusty floorboards, her cheeks burning with shame. She had learned long ago that responding only made things worse. The store owner, a thin man named Cornelius Pike, banged his hand on the counter. "Folks, we got ourselves a situation," he announced, his voice carrying across the crowded room. "Y'all know about the mountain man up at Eagle's Peak?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew about Jeremiah Cole, the legendary trapper who lived in the high country. He came down twice a year to trade his furs and pelts, always alone, always silent. Some said he'd survived a Blackfoot attack that killed his entire expedition. Others claimed he'd gone into the mountains to escape a broken heart. Whatever the truth, he'd become something of a myth in these parts. "Well," Pike continued, "he sent word he needs a wife. Says he's got a cabin built, provisions stored, and he's willing to pay handsomely for a woman willing to brave the mountain life." The women in the crowd tittered nervously. Life in the settlement was hard enough. Life in the mountains with a strange, silent man was unthinkable. "How much is he offering?" asked Tom Henderson, the blacksmith. $50 in gold, plus furs worth another 100, Pike replied. "He says he'll come down in 3 days to collect her." $50. Martha's breath caught. That would pay off her father's debts and then some. But she knew what would come next. "I got an idea," called out Samuel Briggs, the tanner, a cruel grin spreading across his weathered face. "Why don't we send him Martha? She's a big package, ain't she? Probably got enough of her to keep a man warm through 3 winters." Laughter erupted throughout the store. Martha felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here, not in front of these people. "Now that ain't a bad idea," Mrs. Henderson chimed in. "She's eating us out of supplies anyway. Might as well get something for her." "What do you say, Martha?" Pike asked, his eyes glinting with something between amusement and calculation. "You willing to be our big delivery to the mountain man?" Martha wanted to run, to disappear into the earth itself. But then she thought of the debt collector who would arrive next month, of the pitying looks and cruel jokes that had become her daily bread, of the hopelessness that had settled over her life like a thick fog. "I'll do it," she heard herself say, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent for a moment before erupting in surprised chatter. "Well, I'll be," Pike said, scratching his chin. "Didn't expect that. All right then, it's settled. We'll have you ready when Cole comes down on Saturday." Martha pushed her way through the crowd and out into the cold afternoon air. She walked quickly toward the small cabin at the edge of town that had been her father's, her mind reeling. What had she just agreed to? But what choice did she have? At least in the mountains she would be free of their mockery. The next 3 days passed in a blur. The women of the town, suddenly helpful now that Martha was leaving, gathered together what they deemed suitable for mountain life. Thick wool dresses, heavy blankets, a cast-iron pot, some seeds for planting. Martha suspected they were simply cleaning out items they no longer wanted, but she accepted them with quiet dignity. On Saturday morning, the entire town gathered at the northern edge of the settlement. Martha stood apart from them, a small bundle of possessions at her feet, wearing her warmest dress and her mother's old shawl. The sound of hoofbeats made everyone turn. From the tree line emerged a figure on horseback, leading a pack mule. As he drew closer, Martha got her first clear look at Jeremiah Cole. He was tall, that much was obvious even mounted, with broad shoulders and a lean build that spoke of hard living. His face was weathered and lined, with a dark beard streaked with gray, despite him appearing to be no more than 40. But it was his eyes that caught Martha's attention, pale blue, sharp as a hawk's, and utterly without judgment as they swept over the assembled crowd. He dismounted in one fluid motion and walked toward Pike, ignoring everyone else. "You Pike?" His voice was rough from disuse, but not unkind. "That's me, Mr. Cole. We got your bride ready for you." For the first time, Jeremiah's gaze moved to Martha. She forced herself to meet his eyes, expecting to see disappointment, disgust, or worse, the mocking amusement she'd seen so many times before. Instead, his expression remained neutral as he looked her over. The silence stretched uncomfortably. "That's her?" he finally asked. "That's her," Pike confirmed, barely concealing his smirk. "Name's Martha Sullivan. She's a big girl, strong as an ox. Probably eat you out of house and home, but she looks capable," Jeremiah interrupted, his tone flat. He walked over to Martha, stopping a respectful distance away. "You know what you're agreeing to? Life in the mountains is hard. Winter lasts 6 months. Nearest neighbor is 2 days' ride. It's just me, the cabin, and whatever we can hunt or grow." Martha lifted her chin. "I know, sir. I can work hard. I won't be a burden to you." Something flickered in those pale eyes. "Can you shoot?" "My father taught me." "Cook?" "Yes, sir." "Handle yourself if I'm gone for days at a time?" "I'll learn whatever I need to learn." Jeremiah studied her for another long moment, then turned back to Pike. "The gold as we agreed." Pike's eyes widened. "You're taking her? Just like that?" "Why wouldn't I?" Jeremiah's voice carried an edge now. "She's agreed. I'm agreed. Business is done." He pulled a leather pouch from his coat and tossed it to Pike, who caught it with fumbling hands. The coins clinked heavily. "That's all I need," Jeremiah said, gesturing to Martha. "A capable woman willing to work. What else matters?" The crowd had gone silent, their expected entertainment evaporating. Martha felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Was it hope? Jeremiah picked up her bundle with one hand as if it weighed nothing. "Can you ride?" "Not well," Martha admitted. "You'll learn. Come on." He led her to his horses, helped her mount the mare with surprising gentleness, and secured her belongings to the pack mule. Within minutes, they were riding away from Copper Ridge, leaving behind a crowd of stunned faces. They rode in silence for hours, climbing steadily into the foothills. Martha's inexperience showed, and she gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, but the mare seemed placid and sure-footed. As the sun began to sink toward the horizon, Jeremiah finally spoke. "We'll camp here tonight. Cabin's still a day's ride away." He helped her dismount, and Martha tried not to gasp at the soreness already setting into her legs and back. Jeremiah set about making camp with practiced efficiency, building a fire, unpacking supplies, setting up a simple shelter. "You can gather firewood if you're able," he said. "Not too far from camp. Stay where you can see the fire." Martha nodded and set about her task, grateful for something to do. When she returned with her second armload, she found Jeremiah cooking something in a pan over the fire that smelled surprisingly good. "Sit," he said, gesturing to a log he'd rolled near the flames. "Food's almost ready." They ate in silence, venison with wild onions and some kind of root vegetable Martha didn't recognize. It was simple but delicious, and she tried not to eat too quickly, conscious of the town's accusations about her appetite. "You don't have to do that," Jeremiah said quietly. Martha looked up, startled. "Do what?" "Pretend you're not hungry. I've got plenty. Mountains provide if you know how to ask." Tears welled in Martha's eyes before she could stop them. The simple kindness, the lack of mockery in his tone, broke something open inside her. Jeremiah looked away, giving her privacy for her tears. They were cruel to you down there, weren't they? All my life, Martha whispered, people fear what they don't understand, judge what makes them uncomfortable. He poked at the fire with a stick. That's why I left. Got tired of people looking at my scars, whispering about what happened up on the Yellowstone. Got tired of women flinching when I came near. Figured the mountains wouldn't judge me for surviving when others didn't. Martha wiped her eyes. What did happen? Another time, maybe. Point is, I don't care what those people thought of you. I care if you can pull your weight, respect the land, and not fill my cabin with foolish chatter. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Jeremiah, we're going to be partners in this, Martha. Partners don't stand on ceremony. Then yes, Jeremiah. He nodded, satisfied. Get some sleep. Tomorrow's a long ride. The next day, they climbed higher into the mountains. The landscape transformed around them. Dense forests of pine and aspen, crystal streams tumbling over rocks, peaks that seemed to touch the sky. Despite her soreness, Martha found herself captivated by the wild beauty. It's magnificent, she breathed as they paused at a ridge overlooking a vast valley. Jeremiah's expression softened. Waited my whole life to find someone who'd see it that way instead of just seeing danger and hardship. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they emerged into a clearing. There stood a cabin, solidly built from hewn logs, with a stone chimney and real glass windows, a luxury in these parts. Beyond it was a barn and a small corral holding several goats and chickens. Home, Jeremiah said simply. Over the following weeks, Martha learned the rhythms of mountain life. Jeremiah was patient but expected competence. He taught her to shoot better, to read the weather, to identify edible plants and dangerous animals. She proved herself capable, and gradually she felt strength building in her body that she'd never known before. The work was hard, hauling water, tending animals, preserving food for winter. But it was honest work, and Jeremiah never criticized her weight or size. In fact, he seemed to appreciate that she could help him with heavy tasks that most women couldn't manage. You're strong, he observed one day as she helped him stack firewood. That's valuable up here. Strength keeps you alive. Winter came early and fierce. Snow piled high around the cabin, and for days at a time they couldn't venture outside. But Jeremiah had prepared well. They had smoked meat, dried vegetables, a ground corn, and plenty of firewood. During those long winter nights sitting by the fire, they began to talk. Really talk. Jeremiah told her about his past, how he'd been part of a fur trapping expedition that was attacked by hostile warriors. He was the only survivor, left for dead with terrible wounds. He'd crawled to safety and slowly healed, but the experience changed him. Couldn't be around people anymore, he explained. Every time someone looked at me, I saw pity or fear. Got tired of being treated like a ghost. I understand, Martha said softly. People looked at me and saw only my size, never saw that I could read and write, that I loved poetry, that I noticed how the light changed through the seasons. I was just the fat girl to them. You're not that here, Jeremiah said firmly. Here, you're Martha who can shoot straight, who makes the best cornbread I've ever tasted, who noticed the eagle's nest before I did, who isn't afraid of hard work. That's who you are. Something shifted between them that night. The partnership they'd formed began to feel like something more. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers and returning wildlife. Martha had never felt so healthy, so strong, so alive. The constant physical work, the clean mountain air, the good food, and the absence of stress had transformed her. She wasn't smaller, her frame had always been naturally large, but she was muscular and capable now, moving through the world with a confidence she'd never possessed. One evening, as they sat on the cabin's porch watching the sunset paint the peaks gold and pink, Jeremiah cleared his throat awkwardly. Martha, I need to tell you something. She turned to look at him, suddenly nervous. When Pike sent word he had a woman willing to come up here, I expected, well, I don't know what I expected. But when I saw you standing there, saw how they were treating you, heard what they said. He paused, his jaw tight. I wanted to knock every one of them flat. How dare they mock you? How dare they offer you up like you were worthless? But you agreed to take me, Martha said quietly. I did, but not for the reasons they thought. I saw something in your eyes when you looked at them. Pride, dignity, refusal to break even when they were doing their damnedest to break you. I thought, that's someone who might survive up here, someone with steel in their spine. He turned to face her fully. I was right. You're the strongest person I know, Martha Sullivan. And somewhere along the way, this arrangement stopped being just an arrangement for me. He struggled with the words. I've come to care for you deeply, and I'm hoping you might feel the same. Martha's heart soared. I do. I think I started to care when you said, that's all I need that first day. When you saw me as capable instead of contemptible. When you treated me as a partner, not a burden. Jeremiah reached for her hand, his touch gentle. Then let's make this a true marriage, not just an arrangement. I want to build a life with you, Martha, a real life. Yes, Martha whispered. Yes, that's what I want too. He kissed her then, soft and sweet, as the last light faded from the sky. The years that followed were hard but happy. They expanded the cabin, added more livestock, and built a life that suited them both. Occasionally, they would go down to trade in Copper Ridge, where the townspeople's reactions ranged from stunned to embarrassed. Martha had changed dramatically, not because she'd lost weight, though the physical work had redistributed it into muscle, but because she carried herself differently now. She walked with confidence, spoke with authority, and met every gaze with calm assurance. She was no longer the mocked girl, but a mountain woman, capable and strong. Mrs. Henderson once tried to make a snide comment about how mountain life must be treating her well, but Martha simply smiled and said, It is. I've never been happier. What could they say to that? Years later, when their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's strength in her father's eyes, Martha sat on the porch, rocking the baby, and thought about how far she'd come. From the girl everyone mocked to a woman who had built a life in the wilderness, who had found love in the most unexpected place, who had discovered her own worth when the world tried to tell her she had none. Jeremiah joined her, sliding an arm around her shoulders. Thinking about the day we met, he asked. Sometimes I think about what my life would have been if you hadn't come, if I hadn't taken that chance. I think about it too. Think about how close I came to living my whole life alone because I was too proud and too hurt to let anyone in. You saved me, Martha, just as much as I saved you. We saved each other, Martha corrected gently. He kissed the top of her head. That we did. As the sun set over the mountains they called home, Martha reflected on the strange path that had brought her here. The cruelty of Copper Ridge had been meant to break her, to dispose of her like unwanted goods. Instead, it had delivered her to exactly where she needed to be. Big package delivered, she murmured with a wry smile. What's that? Jeremiah asked. Nothing. Just remembering something foolish someone once said. It doesn't matter anymore. And it didn't. None of it mattered except this. The man beside her, the child in her arms, the home they'd built together, and the mountains standing eternal watch over it all. She was no longer the girl the town had mocked. She was Martha Cole, mountain woman, beloved wife, and mother. She was strong, capable, and valued. She was, finally and completely, enough. And in the end, that was all she'd ever needed. Dui jai la joan bosang besufat trientin kam, jok chen vao sao fan mua jong jiao tien va truok ki mua quan jane. As the snow continued to fall through January and into February, the cabin became a world unto itself. Martha and Jeremiah fell into rhythms that felt almost like a dance. She would wake early to stoke the fire and prepare breakfast while he tended to the animals in the barn. They would work together on various tasks throughout the day, their movements synchronized in ways that surprised them both. But it was the evenings that Martha treasured most. After supper, they would sit by the fire, and Jeremiah would work on mending traps or carving while Martha sewed or read from one of the few books she'd brought with her. The silence between them had transformed from awkward to comfortable, punctuated by easy conversation. One particularly cold night, when the wind howled like wolves around the cabin, Martha was reading aloud from a collection of poetry her mother had given her years ago. Jeremiah had asked her to read to him a few nights prior, admitting that he'd never learned his letters properly. "That's beautiful," he said softly when she finished a verse about spring meadows. "Read it again." Martha did, and when she glanced up, she found him watching her instead of his work, an expression on his face she couldn't quite interpret. "What is it?" she asked. "Your voice," he said. "It's soothing. I never knew words could sound like that. Down in the settlements, people always seem to be yelling or complaining or gossiping, but when you read, it's like music." Martha felt heat rise to her cheeks. "My father used to say the same thing. He'd have me read to him every evening." "Tell me about him," Jeremiah said, setting aside his carving. And so Martha did. She talked about her father, an educated man who'd come west seeking opportunity but found only hardship, how he'd never made her feel ashamed of her size, how he'd taught her that worth came from character and kindness, not appearance, how his death had left her not just alone, but vulnerable to a community that had always judged her harshly. "He sounds like a good man," Jeremiah said. "He was. He would have liked you, I think. He always said true strength was quiet, not loud and boastful like the men in town." Jeremiah was silent for a moment. "I wish I could have met him, to thank him." "Thank him? For what?" "For raising a daughter who knew her own worth, even when others tried to take it from her, for teaching you to be strong, for making you who you are." Martha felt tears prick her eyes. "Jeremiah." He stood and crossed to where she sat, kneeling beside her chair. "I'm not good with words like you are, Martha, but I need you to know something. When I came down that mountain looking for a wife, I was looking for companionship, yes, but I was also looking for, I don't know, someone who wouldn't expect things from me I couldn't give, someone practical." He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle. "But you've become so much more than that. You've brought life back to this cabin, to these mountains, to me. When I hear you singing while you work, or see you standing on the porch at sunset, just appreciating the beauty around us, or watch you handle a rifle with confidence, Martha, you make me feel things I thought died years ago." "What things?" Martha whispered, her heart pounding. "Hope, happiness, the feeling that tomorrow might be even better than today." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I think I'm falling in love with you." "No, I know I am. And it terrifies me, because I never expected to feel this way again." Martha cupped his weathered face with her free hand. "I'm falling in love with you too. I think I have been since you looked at those cruel people and said, 'That's all I need,' like I was exactly what you wanted instead of a joke they were playing on you." Jeremiah leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "You were. You are. Martha, I know we married out of convenience, out of necessity, but I want more than that now. I want a real marriage. I want to wake up every morning grateful you're beside me. I want to build a future together, not just survive." "I want that too," Martha said, her voice thick with emotion, "more than I've ever wanted anything." He opened his eyes, and in them she saw vulnerability she'd never seen before. "I'm not an easy man, Martha. I've got wounds that go deeper than the scars on my body. Sometimes I wake up in the night from nightmares. Sometimes I need to be alone in the woods for a day just to quiet my mind. I can go days without talking much. I'm not the romantic hero from those stories you read." "I don't want a romantic hero from a story," Martha said firmly. "I want you, the real you. The man who patiently taught me to track deer, who never once made me feel ashamed of who I am, who looks at me like I'm beautiful even though I know I'm not by any conventional measure. You are beautiful, Jeremiah said fiercely. Not in spite of how you look, but because of who you are. Your strength, your kindness, your courage, the way you face every challenge without complaint, the way you've made this cabin feel like a home. That's beauty, Martha, real beauty that doesn't fade. He stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her. Martha leaned into his embrace, feeling safe and cherished for the first time in years. They stood like that for a long moment, the fire crackling beside them, the wind howling outside, the world reduced to just the two of them. "Stay with me," Jeremiah murmured into her hair. "Not just as an arrangement or a convenience. Stay with me because you want to. Choose me. Choose this life. Choose us." "I choose you," Martha whispered. "I choose all of this, every difficult, beautiful moment of it." That night, their marriage became real in all ways. Jeremiah was gentle and patient, treating Martha with a tenderness that made her weep. Afterward, as they lay together in the darkness, she felt truly whole for the first time in her life. The days that followed seemed brighter somehow. They began to share more. Small touches throughout the day, knowing glances, private jokes. Jeremiah became more expressive, his rare smiles appearing more frequently. Martha found herself laughing, something she'd rarely done in Copper Ridge. One morning, Jeremiah surprised her by presenting a small wooden box he'd been carving in secret. "For you," he said, almost shy. Inside was a delicate wooden flower, carved with incredible detail, each petal, each leaf perfect. "It's beautiful," Martha breathed. "When did you make this?" "Been working on it since Christmas. Wanted to give you something that wouldn't wilt or fade, something as lasting as—" He trailed off, looking embarrassed. "As lasting as what?" "As lasting as my feelings for you," he finished quietly. Martha threw her arms around him, the wooden flower clutched carefully in one hand. "I love you, Jeremiah Cole." "I love you too, Martha Cole." He pulled back to look at her. "And I promise you, I'll spend every day trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," she said. "You already are." They also began to share their dreams for the future. Jeremiah spoke of expanding their holdings, maybe bringing in cattle when they had saved enough. Martha talked about possibly having children someday, if God blessed them, and teaching them to love the mountains as they did. "I want our children to grow up knowing they're valued for who they are, not what they look like or how they fit someone else's expectations," Martha said one evening. "I want them to be strong and free like we are here." "They will be," Jeremiah promised. "Any child of ours will know nothing but love and respect. I'll make sure of it." During one of the brief warm spells in late February, they hiked to a high meadow Jeremiah wanted to show her. The climb was steep and challenging, but Martha's strength had increased dramatically over the months, and she made it without too much difficulty. At the top, the view took her breath away. Miles of pristine wilderness stretching in every direction, peaks piercing the blue sky, a frozen lake glittering like a jewel in the valley below. "I used to come here when I needed to think," Jeremiah said. "When the loneliness got too heavy, I'd stand here and try to imagine sharing this with someone. But I could never picture who that person would be. Until now." He turned to her, taking both her hands. "Martha, I know we already said vows back in Copper Ridge, but those were empty words spoken in front of people who didn't care about us. I want to say real vows to you here, in this place that's ours, with only God and the mountains as witnesses." Martha nodded, too moved to speak. Jeremiah cleared his throat. "I, Jeremiah Cole, take you, Martha Sullivan Cole, as my true wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and cherish you for all my days. I promise to see you truly, to value your strength and your gentleness equally. I promise to build a life with you that's worthy of your courage. I promise to love you, not despite your past, but because every struggle made you who you are. This I swear on my life and soul." Tears streamed down Martha's face as she responded, "I, Martha Sullivan Cole, take you, Jeremiah Cole, as my true husband. I promise to stand beside you in all things, to be your partner and your friend. I promise to respect your need for silence and your scars, both visible and invisible. I promise to make our home a place of peace and love. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. This I swear before God and these mountains that have given us both new life." They sealed their vows with a kiss as the wind swept around them, carrying away the last vestiges of their old, lonely lives. As they walked back down the mountain together, hand in hand, Martha realized that she had finally found what she'd been searching for without even knowing it. Not just love, but belonging. Not just acceptance, but celebration. Not just survival, but life in its fullest, richest sense. "What are you thinking?" Jeremiah asked, noticing her smile. "That I'm grateful," Martha said simply, "for all of it. Even the hard parts that brought me here, because they brought me to you." Jeremiah squeezed her hand. "The mountains knew what they were doing when they brought us together." "Maybe they did," Martha agreed, looking up at the peaks surrounding them. "Maybe they did." The obese girl gave her last bread. To starving mountain man, he swore to protect her forever. The Wyoming territory stretched endlessly beneath a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the world whole. Sarah Whitmore pressed her palm against the rough canvas of the covered wagon, steadying herself as the wheels jolted over another rut in the trail. The year was 1834, and she had been traveling westward for 3 months with the Morrison wagon train. 27 families seeking new lives beyond the frontier. Sarah was different from the other women in the company. At 23 years old, she carried considerable weight on her frame, a fact that had drawn whispers and sidelong glances since childhood. Her round face bore kind eyes the color of chestnuts, and her hands, though plump, moved with practiced efficiency at any task. She had grown accustomed to being overlooked, to being the subject of hushed conversations that ceased when she drew near. "Miss Whitmore," called Mrs. Morrison from the neighboring wagon. "We'll be stopping soon for the night. Best prepare your provisions." Sarah nodded, though her heart sank. Her provisions had dwindled to almost nothing. The journey had proven more arduous than anyone anticipated. Early snowstorms in the mountains had delayed them by weeks, and supplies meant to last until Fort Bridger were now dangerously depleted. Many families shared what they could, but Sarah noticed how their generosity toward her had waned as their own children grew hungry. She understood. She always understood. That evening, as the wagons circled for camp at the base of the Wind River Range, Sarah took inventory of her remaining food. 1 loaf of bread, hard as a stone and dense as lead. It was all that stood between her and starvation until they reached the fort, still 5 days distant if the weather held. The mountains loomed above them, their peaks already white with snow, though autumn had barely begun. Sarah gathered wood for the fire, her movements slow and deliberate. Hunger had been her companion for 2 weeks now, a gnawing presence that made her dizzy when she stood too quickly. "You look peaked, Sarah," said Elizabeth Parker, one of the few women who still spoke kindly to her. "Are you managing all right?" "Well enough," Sarah replied, mustering a smile. "The Lord provides." Elizabeth squeezed her hand, then returned to her own family's fire where her children clamored for their evening meal. Sarah sat alone by her small fire, turning the loaf of bread over in her hands. She would eat half tonight, she decided, and save the rest for tomorrow. It was a meager plan, but it was all she had. The scream came just as darkness settled fully over the camp. It was a child's scream, high and terrified, coming from beyond the circle of wagons. Men grabbed rifles and rushed toward the sound. Sarah struggled to her feet, her heart pounding. Stay back!" shouted John Morrison, but Sarah could see well enough in the firelight. A grizzly bear had wandered close to camp, drawn by the smell of cooking. It stood on its hind legs, massive and terrible, between the wagons and little Tommy Harrison, who had wandered off to relieve himself. The men fired warning shots, and miraculously, the bear dropped to all fours and lumbered away into the darkness. Tommy was retrieved, sobbing, and his mother clutched him fiercely while scolding him through her tears. But the incident left everyone shaken. Guards were doubled, and people spoke in hushed voices about the dangers that surrounded them. Sarah returned to her fire, her appetite gone, and wrapped the bread carefully before tucking it away. She did not sleep well that night. The wind howled down from the mountains, and she dreamed of bears with eyes like burning coals. Morning brought a shocking discovery. The livestock had broken their hobbles during the night, spooked by some predator, and scattered. It took most of the day to round them up, and when the count was finally made, 3 horses and a milk cow were still missing. "We'll have to leave them," Morrison announced grimly. "We cannot afford another delay." But young Thomas Morrison, the wagon master's son, insisted on searching. "That's my horse out there. I'll find him and catch up." "Thomas, no," his father began. "I'll go with him," volunteered a tall, lean man named Jacob Reed. "2 sets of eyes are better than 1. We'll be back before you've gone 5 miles. Reluctantly, Morrison agreed. The wagon train rolled forward slowly, while Thomas and Jacob rode into the foothills. They did not return that day, nor the next. By the 3rd day, Morrison's face had aged 10 years. His wife wept quietly in their wagon. The train could not stop. Winter was coming, and they had to reach the fort. But they moved slowly, scanning the horizons, hoping. On the 4th day, as the wagons prepared to make camp, Sarah noticed something. She'd climbed a small rise to gather firewood when she spotted a figure moving in the distance, staggering between the trees. Not a bear, a man. "Someone's coming!" she called out, dropping her bundle of sticks. Men rushed to investigate, guns ready. As the figure drew closer, they could see it was indeed a man, but not Thomas or Jacob. This was someone else entirely. A mountain man by the look of him, dressed in buckskins and furs, with a thick beard and long dark hair. He was bent nearly double, stumbling and clearly in desperate condition. He collapsed at the edge of camp before anyone could reach him. The men approached cautiously while the women and children hung back. Sarah watched as they turned him over. His face was gaunt, his lips cracked and bleeding. His eyes, when they fluttered open, held the wild look of someone who had stared into death's face. "Water," he rasped. Someone brought water, and he drank greedily, though half of it spilled down his beard. When he had drunk his fill, he lay back, gasping. "How long since you've eaten?" asked Morrison. The man's laugh was bitter. "Week, maybe more. Lost track." "What happened to you?" The mountain man's eyes closed. "Pawnee raiding party. Took my horse, my supplies, my rifle, left me for dead. Been walking ever since. Thought I was done for." The camp buzzed with nervous conversation. Pawnee in the area was dangerous news, but the immediate question was what to do with this stranger. "We can spare some water," Morrison said carefully. "But we're running low on provisions ourselves. We lost," his voice caught. "We lost 2 men searching for stock. We barely have enough to feed our own." Sarah listened to this from her place by her wagon. She looked at the mountain man, at the way his hands trembled and his breathing came shallow. She thought of her loaf of bread, hidden in her supplies. It was all she had. Half remained, enough for 2 more days if she was very careful. 2 days to somehow make it to Fort Bridger, where there would be food to purchase. She needed it. But this man was dying. Sarah's feet moved before her mind caught up. She walked to her wagon, reached into her dwindling supplies, and pulled out the wrapped parcel. The bread felt heavy in her hands, heavy with consequence. The camp fell silent as she approached the mountain man, She knelt beside him with some difficulty, her knees protesting, and unwrapped the bread. "Here," she said softly, offering it to him. "It's not much, but it's something." The man's eyes opened. They were blue, she noticed, startlingly blue against his weathered face. He stared at the bread, then at her. "That's your food," he said, his voice hoarse. "I know. You need it. So do you. More than I do, I think." He studied her face for a long moment. Around them, the camp watched in silence. Sarah felt the weight of their stares, heard the unspoken questions. Why would she give her last food to a stranger? Why would someone like her, someone who clearly did not miss many meals, offer charity to this wild man? Let them wonder. She knew why. She'd been hungry for weeks, yes, but she'd been hungry for kindness her whole life. She knew what it was to need something desperately and have no one offer it. She would not let another soul suffer that way, not if she could help it. "Take it," she said, pressing the bread into his hands. "Please." The mountain man's fingers closed around the loaf. A single tear tracked through the dirt on his face. He broke off a piece and ate slowly, carefully, as if the bread were made of gold. Sarah watched him, feeling something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction exactly, but rightness. When he had eaten half, he tried to return the rest to her. "No," Sarah said. "You need your strength." "So do you. I can see it in your face. You're hungry too." "I'll manage. I always do." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Whitmore." "James. James Bridger. No relation to the fort," he added with a weak smile. "Sarah Whitmore, you just saved my life." "God saved your life. I just had some bread." "Your last bread." She shrugged, uncomfortable with his intensity. "I couldn't let you starve." James Bridger closed his eyes again, but when he spoke, his voice was stronger. "I'm a man who pays his debts, Miss Whitmore. You hear me? I pay my debts. I swear to you, on my life and my honor, I will protect you from this day forward. Whatever comes, wherever you go, I will keep you safe. This I vow." The words seemed too grand for the moment, dramatic and outsized. Sarah flushed with embarrassment. "It's not necessary. I didn't do it for payment." "I know. That's why I'm making this vow." His blue eyes opened and locked onto hers. "I mean it, Sarah Whitmore. You'll see." By morning, James Bridger could stand, though he remained weak. The bread had saved him from immediate death, but he needed time to recover. Morrison was reluctant to take on another mouth to feed, but Bridger made himself useful immediately. He knew the territory, had trapped these mountains for 5 years before his misfortune, and could guide them to Fort Bridger by a faster route. 3 days instead of 5, he promised. "I know a pass the wagons can manage." With winter threatening and provisions running low, Morrison agreed. True to his word, Bridger led them through a narrow valley Sarah would never have spotted, shaving precious days off their journey. But he did something else too, something that surprised everyone, including Sarah. He stayed near her wagon. When she struggled to lift her water barrels, he appeared to help. When her wagon wheel struck a rock and threatened to break, he was there to guide it safely past. When they made camp, he brought her wood for her fire without being asked. "You don't have to do this," Sarah told him on the second day. "I'm fine on my own." "I know you are," James replied, stacking the wood neatly. "But I made a vow. I released you from it. You can't. It wasn't made to you. It was made to myself, to the man I want to be." He looked at her steadily. "Let me keep my word, Sarah. It's all a man really has out here." She wanted to argue, but something in his face stopped her. He meant it. Every word. The other members of the wagon train noticed, of course. Sarah heard the whispers, saw the speculative looks. Let them talk. She had heard worse. On the evening of the second day after James's arrival, as Sarah prepared her meager dinner, corn mush, flavored with nothing but salt, Elizabeth Parker approached their fire. "Sarah, I wanted to, that is, David and I talked," and Elizabeth held out a cloth bundle. It's salt pork. Not much, but I thought you might. Well, after what you did for Mr. Bridger, sharing your last food, it seemed only right. Sarah's throat tightened. Elizabeth, I can't. You can. You will. Elizabeth pressed the bundle into Sarah's hands. You showed us all what charity looks like. Let us return a measure of it. Over the next hour, 3 other families brought small offerings: a handful of dried beans, a cup of flour, a precious egg, carefully wrapped. Sarah accepted each gift with tears streaming down her face. When they had gone, James added the salt pork to her corn mush, transforming it into a real meal. They sat together by the fire, eating in companionable silence. You're loved, James said finally. Maybe you didn't know it, but you are. They're just being kind. Because you were kind first. You planted seeds, Sarah. This is the harvest. She thought about that as she lay in her bedroll that night. Perhaps he was right. Perhaps kindness did return, given time. They reached Fort Bridger the next evening, 3 days after James had joined them, exactly as he had promised. The fort was a rough collection of log buildings surrounded by a stockade, but to the weary travelers, it looked like paradise. There would be food here, supplies, and rest, but there was news too, and it was grim. The fort's trader, a grizzled man named Cooper, confirmed what James had told them. Pawnee have been raiding something fierce this season. You folks were lucky. They hit a supply train just last week, killed 2 men, and there's worse news for you, Morrison. Morrison's face went pale. What news? 2 men came in 5 days ago. Said they'd been with a wagon train, gone looking for lost stock, got separated. They're alive, but just barely. Pawnee got them too, took everything but their lives. Thomas? Morrison's voice cracked. Is one of them my Thomas? They're in the surgeon's cabin. Come on. Sarah watched Morrison run toward the indicated building, his wife close behind. She felt James move beside her. Your son? He asked. The wagon master's son. He went searching for lost horses. We thought she didn't finish. She didn't have to. Thomas Morrison and Jacob Reed were indeed alive, though both bore the marks of their ordeal, wounds from arrows, signs of fever, and the hollow-eyed look of men who had faced death. But they were alive, and the joy in the Morrison family was profound. That night, the wagon train celebrated. There was music and dancing, and though rations were still controlled, Cooper sold them provisions at fair prices and contributed a deer carcass for roasting. Sarah sat apart from the celebration, as was her habit. She was content to watch, to feel the warmth of the fire and the fullness of her stomach, her first full meal in weeks. But James found her, as he always seemed to. Dance with me, he said, extending his hand. Sarah laughed, thinking he was joking, but his face was serious. I don't dance, she said. Neither do I, particularly well. We'll be terrible together. James. Sarah. He crouched down to her level. I see how you sit apart. I see how you think you're not part of this, not really. But you are. You're the heart of it. You saved my life, and I led them here safely. That boy over there, he gestured to Thomas Morrison. He's alive because we got here in time for proper doctoring. All of it traces back to your bread, your kindness. Now come and dance with me, and let these people see you the way I do. Sarah's heart hammered in her chest. How do you see me? As someone beautiful. Moo, the word hung in the air between them. Sarah searched his face for mockery, for cruelty, for the joke that must be coming, but she found only honesty. I'm not, she began. You are. Beautiful in the ways that matter, in your spirit, your generosity, the strength it takes to be kind when the world has not been kind to you. He kept his hand extended. Dance with me, Sarah Whitmore. She took his hand. They danced clumsily, awkwardly, stepping on each other's feet and laughing. Sarah felt the eyes on them, some surprised, some disapproving, some simply curious. But she also felt James's hand solid in hers, and she felt for the first time in years like she belonged somewhere. The wagon train remained at Fort Bridger for a week, resting and resupplying. Sarah learned that most families would winter at the fort or in the nearby valleys, waiting for spring before continuing west to Oregon or California. But some, like the Morrisons, planned to push on immediately to the Salt Lake Valley, where Brigham Young was establishing a settlement. It would be risky, but Morrison wanted his son under proper care, and there were doctors in the valley. Sarah had to make a choice: winter at the fort with strangers, or risk the journey to the valley with people she knew. The decision was complicated by James. He had recovered his strength and spent his days working at the fort, trading his knowledge of the mountains for supplies. He had been a trapper before the Pawnee attack, he explained, working these ranges for years. He knew every creek and valley, every pass and game trail. "I'm heading up to my cabin soon," he told Sarah one afternoon as they walked along the creek near the fort. "It's up in the high country, tucked in a valley where the trapping's good. I've got supplies cached there, furs waiting to be brought down. I'll winter there like I always do." "Alone?" Sarah asked. "I've got no family. Never married. Just me and the mountains." He paused, then added carefully, "But I meant what I said, Sarah. My vow. If you're heading to the Salt Lake Valley, I'll guide the wagons there and see you safe. I won't leave you unprotected. And your cabin, your furs, they'll keep. You matter more." Sarah's chest tightened. No one had ever said such things to her. No one had ever made her feel like she mattered, like her safety was worth sacrificing for. "I don't know what to do," she admitted. "I don't know where I belong." James stopped walking and turned to face her. "Can I speak plainly?" She nodded. "You don't owe those people in the wagon train anything. They took your help when it suited them, but they never really saw you. Not the way they should have. The fort's no better. Strangers who'll take your money and forget your name." "And your cabin?" she asked quietly. "My cabin's got room for two. It's rough living, Sarah. Isolated. Months of snow and nothing but mountains for company. But it's peaceful. Safe, and He faltered, then pushed on. "I would be honored if you would consider wintering there. With me." Sarah's heart pounded so hard she thought it might crack her ribs. "James, are you asking me to—" "I'm asking you to give me a chance, to give us a chance." He took her hands in his. "I know it's fast. I know I'm just a rough mountain man with more scars than sense. But Sarah, from the moment you gave me that bread, something changed in me. You saw a dying stranger and chose kindness. You gave everything you had. I've never known anyone like you, and I don't want to let you go." Tears streamed down Sarah's face. "People will talk. They'll say terrible things. Let them. We'll be in the mountains, just us and the ravens and the pine trees. They don't care what anybody looks like. They don't gossip." She laughed through her tears. "You make it sound simple. It is simple. I care for you. You're the finest person I've ever met, and I hope, you might care for me too." "I do," Sarah whispered. "I do, but I'm afraid." "Of what?" "Of hoping. Of believing this is real. Of waking up and finding out it was all a dream." James pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. He smelled of pine smoke and leather and something else, something wild and clean. "It's real," he murmured into her hair. "I promise you, Sarah, it's real." They were married 3 days later by the fort's chaplain, a Methodist circuit rider who happened to be wintering at Bridger. It was a small ceremony, just a handful of witnesses, including the Morrisons and Elizabeth Parker. Sarah wore her best dress, though it was travel-stained and worn. James wore clean buckskins and had trimmed his beard. When the chaplain pronounced them man and wife, James kissed her gently, and Sarah felt the last of her walls crumble. They spent their wedding night in the fort's small guest cabin, and James was tender with her, patient and kind. He traced the curves of her body with reverence, whispering how beautiful she was until Sarah almost believed it. In the morning, they prepared for the journey to James's mountain cabin. He'd purchased supplies, flour, salt, coffee, sugar, dried beans, and preserved meat. His pack horses could carry it all, along with Sarah's few possessions. "It's a 3-day ride," he told her. "Hard country, but beautiful. You'll see." They departed Fort Bridger on a clear October morning, the peaks above them brilliant with fresh snow. Sarah rode a gentle mare James had traded for, her first time on a horse in months. He rode beside her, leading the pack animals, constantly checking to ensure she was comfortable. The journey was indeed hard. They climbed steadily into the mountains, following game trails and creek beds that only James could identify. But it was also breathtaking. Aspens blazed gold against dark pines. Eagles circled overhead. Once they spotted a herd of elk moving through a distant meadow like shadows. On the third day, they descended into a small valley ringed by peaks. A creek ran through it, and beside the creek stood a sturdy log cabin with a stone chimney. "Home," James said simply. The cabin was larger than Sarah expected, with a main room, a sleeping loft, and a small storage area. James had built it himself over several winters, adding to it each year. Inside it was clean and well organized, with shelves holding supplies, a solid table and chairs, and a bed frame waiting for a mattress. "I've got furs enough to make it comfortable," James said, already unloading the pack horses. "And we'll cut fresh pine boughs for extra cushioning." Sarah stood in the doorway, looking at this place that would be her home. It was so different from anything she had known. No neighbors, no town, no church bells or market days. Just mountains and sky and the man who had sworn to protect her. "It's perfect," she said. Winter came early that year, and fierce. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep around the cabin, and the temperature plunged so low that water froze in its bucket overnight. But inside the cabin, Sarah found a happiness she had never imagined possible. James taught her the rhythms of mountain life. They rose with the sun and slept when darkness fell. They ate simple meals, venison stew, cornbread, beans flavored with salt pork. James checked his trap lines while Sarah managed the cabin, learning to keep the fire going, to melt snow for water, to cook on the open hearth. But the domestic routine was only part of it. What surprised Sarah most was the companionship. James talked to her, really talked, sharing stories of his childhood in Kentucky, his journey west, his years in the mountains. He asked her questions too, about her life, her thoughts, her dreams. He listened when she answered, his blue eyes intent on her face. They played cards by firelight. They read aloud from James's small collection of books, a Bible, a volume of Shakespeare, and a battered copy of Robinson Crusoe. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, Sarah mending clothes while James carved or maintained his equipment. And at night, in the loft bed piled with furs, James held her close and made her feel cherished in ways she had never experienced. He never tired of touching her, of tracing the roundness of her hips, the softness of her stomach. "You're made for this life," he would whisper, "strong, capable, beautiful." The first time Sarah laughed, really laughed, the kind that comes from deep joy, was in late November. James had been checking his trap lines and returned covered in snow, looking like a walking snowman. He shook himself off at the door like a dog, sending snow flying everywhere, and Sarah giggled. The sound startled her. When had she last laughed like that? James grinned. "There it is. I was wondering if I'd ever hear that sound." "What sound?" "Pure happiness. It looks good on you, Sarah Bridger." Sarah Bridger. She was still getting used to the name, to the reality of being someone's wife, of belonging. As winter deepened, they fell into patterns, morning coffee together, watching the sun paint the peaks pink and gold, midday meals where they planned their afternoon tasks, evenings by the fire, talking or reading or simply being. James taught Sarah to read signs in the snow, animal tracks, weather patterns, the subtle shifts that warned of coming storms. She taught him songs from her childhood, hymns and folk tunes he had never heard. Their voices blended in the small cabin, rising with the smoke from the fire. In December, a massive blizzard trapped them inside for 4 days. The wind howled like wolves, and snow piled so high against the door they had to dig their way out. But inside, they were warm and safe. James told her about the grizzly bear he had once faced down, and Sarah shared memories of her mother, dead these 10 years. "She would have liked you," Sarah said. "She always said the measure of a man was how he treated people who couldn't help him. You passed that test the day I met you." "How's that?" "You helped me, not the other way around." "Exactly. I was just a fat girl with some bread. I couldn't offer you anything else. No connections, no money, nothing that would benefit you. But you still saw me. You still valued what I gave. Most people—" She trailed off. "Most people are fools," James said firmly. "Their loss is my gain." On Christmas Eve, James surprised her. He had carved a wooden angel, its features rough but recognizable, its wings spread wide. "For our first Christmas," he said, placing it on the mantel. "I'm not much for crafts, but I wanted you to have something." Sarah held the angel carefully, tears stinging her eyes. She had made him something too. A new shirt from fabric she had brought in her wagon, sewn carefully by firelight while he slept. They exchanged gifts and then held each other, grateful for warmth and safety and the improbable love that had brought them together. By January, Sarah realized she was pregnant. The signs were unmistakable: the morning sickness, the tender breasts, the exhaustion that hit her like a fist in the afternoons. She was terrified to tell James. What if he regretted this? What if a child was too much responsibility? They barely knew each other, really. They had married so quickly. But when she finally worked up the courage to speak, James's reaction was instant and joyful. "A baby?" His face lit up like sunrise. "Sarah, that's wonderful. Are you all right? Do you need anything? Should you be resting more?" "I'm fine. I'm healthy. This is normal." He pulled her close, his hand resting gently on her still flat stomach. "A family. I never dared hope." "You're happy?" Sarah asked, needing to hear it. "I'm beyond happy. I'm blessed." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "You've given me everything, Sarah. Everything that matters." Winter gradually loosened its grip. By March, the snow had begun to melt, revealing brown grass and the first green shoots of spring. James's trap lines yielded good catches, and he had a store of prime pelts ready for trading. "I'll need to go down to Fort Bridger in a few weeks," he told Sarah one morning. "Trade these furs, get supplies. But I don't like leaving you alone, especially now." Sarah, now obviously pregnant with a swelling belly, smiled. "I'll be fine. You know how to manage here now." "I know you do, but still—" He frowned, thinking. "Maybe we both go. Make it a trip. You could see the doctor at the fort, make sure everything's progressing well with the baby." So when the trails cleared enough for travel, they loaded the pack horses and made the journey down from the mountains. It took 4 days instead of 3. James insisted on going slowly for Sarah's sake. But they made it safely. Fort Bridger had changed in the months since they left. More buildings had gone up, and the population had swelled with emigrants preparing for the coming wagon season. The fort's doctor, a competent man named Richards, examined Sarah and pronounced her healthy. "Baby should come in late summer," he said. "August, maybe early September. You're strong. You should do fine." They spent 3 days at the fort. James sold his furs for excellent prices and used the money to purchase supplies. Cloth for baby clothes, extra flour and beans, a small cradle he had commissioned from the fort's carpenter. On their second evening, they encountered the Morrisons. The wagon master and his wife had indeed made it to the Salt Lake Valley and were now returning to the fort to guide another train west. Thomas had fully recovered and stood tall and healthy beside his father. "Sarah! James!" Elizabeth Morrison embraced Sarah warmly. "Look at you, you're blooming. When is the baby due?" They talked long into the evening, sharing news. The Morrisons were thriving. The valley settlement was growing. and they had heard that Elizabeth Parker and her family had decided to stay at Fort Bridger, opening a small store. "You should come down from the mountains," Mrs. Morrison urged. "The valley needs good people. There's a community there, Sarah, churches and schools and neighbors." But Sarah shook her head. "The mountains are home now. We're happy there." And she meant it. As they rode back up into the high country, the cradle packed carefully on one of the horses, Sarah felt no regret. The isolation that might have frightened her once now felt like peace. She had James. She had their baby coming. She had everything she needed. Summer came soft and sweet to the high valley. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, lupin and Indian paintbrush, columbine and mountain asters. Sarah's belly grew round and full, and James fussed over her constantly. "You shouldn't be lifting that. I'm pregnant, not made of glass. Still, let me." He was tender with her, protective, constantly amazed by the changes in her body. He would place his hand on her belly and laugh with wonder when the baby kicked. In late August, on a warm afternoon when thunderheads built over the peaks, Sarah's labor began. She had known it would be just her and James. No midwife, no doctor, no experienced women to guide them. She had prepared as best she could, reading what little medical information James's books contained, steeling herself for what was to come. James, for all his mountain competence, was terrified. "Tell me what to do," he said as another contraction gripped her. "Just be here," Sarah gasped. "Don't leave me." "Never. I swore to protect you, remember? That includes this." The labor was long and hard. Sarah had read that first babies often were. She walked when she could, squatted when the contractions demanded, and clung to James through the worst of it. He held her, murmured encouragement, brought her water, and never once left her side. As evening fell and thunder rumbled over the mountains, Sarah felt the urgent need to push. James helped her to the bed, his face pale but determined. He had helped birth calves and foals. He told himself this was the same, though his hands shook. "You can do this," he said. "You're the strongest person I know." Sarah pushed, and the pain was immense, a tearing sensation that made her scream. But she pushed again, and finally, she felt the baby slip free. James caught the infant, his eyes wide with wonder. "It's a girl," he said, his voice breaking. "Sarah, we have a daughter." The baby wailed, strong and healthy, and James wrapped her in a clean cloth before placing her on Sarah's chest. Sarah looked down at the tiny, perfect face, the little fists waving, and felt a love so fierce it took her breath away. "She's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "Like her mother," James said, kissing Sarah's forehead. "You did it. You're both perfect." They named her Hope. The years that followed were not easy. Life in the mountains never was, but they were good. Hope grew strong and healthy, a child of the high country who learned to walk on pine needle paths and whose first words were Papa and Mama and Mountain. James continued trapping, making the journey to Fort Bridger twice a year to trade. Sometimes Sarah and Hope went with him. Sometimes they stayed at the cabin, content in their isolated valley. When Hope was 3, Sarah gave birth to a son they named Samuel. And 2 years after that, another daughter arrived, Grace, born during a spring snowstorm that painted the world white. Their cabin grew to accommodate the expanding family. James added a second room, then a third. They acquired more livestock, chickens, a milk cow, a few sheep. The valley rang with children's laughter and the sounds of a family making a life together. Sarah often thought back to that day on the trail when she had given her last bread to a dying stranger. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like it had happened to a different person, that Sarah had been alone, hungry, convinced she would never be loved or valued. This Sarah was surrounded by love. She was James's wife, Hope and Samuel and Grace's mother, keeper of a mountain home, and the center of her own small, perfect world. Sometimes traders or trappers would stay at their cabin, seeking shelter during storms or trading for supplies. Sarah always welcomed them, always offered what she had because she remembered what it was like to be in need, and always James would watch her with that same wonder he had shown the day they met, as if he still couldn't quite believe his fortune. On Hope's 7th birthday, as they gathered around the table for a special dinner of roast venison and wild berry pie, Hope asked a question. "Papa, how did you and Mama meet?" James and Sarah exchanged glances. The children knew parts of the story, but not all of it. "Your mother saved my life," James said simply. "I was dying, and she gave me her last bread, the only food she had." "Why?" Samuel asked, his 6-year-old face serious. Sarah smiled. "Because he needed it more than I did. Because it was the right thing to do." "But weren't you hungry?" Hope pressed. "Very hungry. Sometimes the right thing to do is also the hard thing to do." James reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. "Your mother is the bravest, kindest person I've ever known. She taught me that true strength isn't about how much you can take, but how much you can give. And because of her generosity, we have all of this family, this home, this life." Little Grace, only 2 years old, didn't understand the words, but sensed the emotion. She clapped her hands and laughed, and the family laughed with her. That night, after the children were asleep in their loft beds, James and Sarah sat by the fire as they had done countless times before. The years had marked them both, silver threads in Sarah's hair, deeper lines around James's eyes, but they were content. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked suddenly. "Regret what?" "All of this, the isolation, the hard work. You could have had an easier life in the settlements, a real town, neighbors, churches." Sarah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she smiled. "I have everything I need right here. You, the children, these mountains. I'm happier than I ever dreamed possible. Do you regret it?" "Not for 1 second. You're my home, Sarah. You always have been, from the moment you handed me that bread." He pulled her close. "I meant what I said that day, that I would protect you forever. It's been the greatest honor of my life to keep that vow." They sat together in the firelight, listening to the wind in the pines and the soft breathing of their children. Outside, the mountains stood eternal and vast, keeping their own vigil over the little valley. Sarah thought about the girl she had been, overlooked, undervalued, convinced she would never matter to anyone. She thought about the single loaf of bread that had changed everything, about the courage it had taken to give away all she had, and about the impossible love that had grown from that one act of kindness. She had given everything, expecting nothing in return, but she had received everything. A husband who cherished her, children who needed her, a home that welcomed her, and a life that fulfilled her. "Tell me," she said to James. "Tell me again." He knew what she meant. He always did. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her hair. "You're brave, you're kind, you're everything I need, and I will protect you always. This I vow." Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the truth of his words settle around her like a warm blanket. She had found her place in the world, not in spite of who she was, but because of it. Her generosity had been rewarded, her kindness returned 1,000-fold. And in the high mountain valley, as the fire burned low and the stars wheeled overhead, Sarah Bridger, once Sarah Whitmore, the overlooked girl with the last loaf of bread, knew she was finally, completely, perfectly home.